It's time. It's time. I'm super excited. How much has changed in this quad? Like, different flight controller, but it's still running KISS, different ESC, Vista versus the Mr. Steele camera. Latency's gonna be different. Weight's gonna be a little different. Oh, and these aren't Mr. Steele's PIDs either. These are the Crunked. Crunked is a tuner. He works with Mark Spatz, and everybody says he's an amazing, amazing tuner. He actually has a tuning service where you send him your quad and he'll tune it for you. He has a preset for KISS called the KISS Golden Starting Point preset, which is just supposed to be a great place to start with KISS. I didn't feel safe using Mr. Steele's PIDs because his PIDs are so on the edge that if you change like anything about the build, they may not work well. So a little more conservative. A lot has changed, but it's still KISS under the hood. So let's put it in the air and see how it flies. Whoop. But before I fly it, let me show you how to build it. Yeah, the flight's gonna be at the end of the video, of course. This is my Mr. Steele Apex build. I bought this quadcopter a while back when I did a review of a $900 ready-to-fly quadcopter versus a $200 iFlight Cidora. I'll put a link to that video down in the video description if you want to see the result. The $900 quad was pretty freaking good, but for the price, the $200 quad was also pretty freaking good. But if you watch that video, you will see that one of the things that happened is the KISS ESC blew up. So I bought a new FETTEC 45 amp ESC. FETTEC is basically the next evolution of KISS. It's like a new company and a new hardware, and it was just new and better. And that FETTEC ESC, I figured as long as I'm doing that, I'll also update the flight controller. I'm going to put a FETTEC F7 flight controller in here. And as long as I'm at it, I'm also going to put a Caddx Vista in here. Why not? Let's just update this thing to all the modern stuff. That's what I'm going to do in this video. Come along with me. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. Now, if you're paying attention, you may be thinking, wait a minute, Joshua, it looks like there's already a FETTEC F7 in here, and it looks like you've already finished this whole thing. That is true. Some footage was lost from the very beginning of this build, and so instead of showing you me doing the very first few steps, I'm going to take this quadcopter apart and show you retroactively what I did. But don't worry, it was very basic stuff like soldering up a capacitor. But I'm going to just take it apart and talk you through it. The most likely scenario is that I just forgot to hit record. Okay, yes, I am now recording. Now, there's not a lot to say about this ESC compared to any other 4-in-1 ESC. The motors solder up just like any other. The one thing that does stand out about this ESC is that they have given you additional solder pads at each corner. 1, 2, 3, and 4. These are the ones that are easiest to see here on this side. And those solder pads are for soldering capacitors. Capacitors help smooth out voltage dips and spikes and help protect the ESC from voltage spikes that could destroy it. If you're running this ESC on 6S, a capacitor is mandatory. If you're running it on 4S, it's still a good idea. The type of capacitor that I'm using for 6S is a 35 volt 470 microfarad capacitor. You're going to want to be either 35 or 50 volts if you're running on 6S. 50 volts is better, but they're also bigger. And you want to be between about 470 and 1000 microfarads. That is a electrolytic capacitor. And the capacitor is attached here to this little device, which is a FETTEC spike absorber. So a capacitor is good at smoothing out hills and valleys in the voltage, but you can get these great big voltage spikes, and the capacitor kind of smooths it out, but it's still a big enough spike that it can damage things. A spike absorber contains an electronic component called a TVS diode, and a TVS diode specifically just slices off the top of those spikes, and it's just additional protection for the ESC against frying. The TVS diode is not mandatory, but it certainly will help, and after frying my last KISS ESC, I'm not taking any chances. So I've just soldered these guys together here. The TVS diode has solder pads that I've soldered the capacitor to, and I couldn't find any way to fit it back here. So I've just got some wires running off of it and soldered them to the positive and the negative pads here on the ESC. In general, the shorter those wires are, the better that the ESC, the capacitor, is going to perform. So maybe I would have done better to solder them up here, but I didn't really know where the capacitor was going to go at the time. Anyway, that's how I've done that. Connecting the ESC and the flight controller together couldn't be simpler. There is just a plug here, and you have a standard SH cable harness, and it comes through just straight through. No rewiring or repinning or anything required, and it plugs straight in to the equivalent plug on the flight controller. And then we're going to set the flight controller down here, facing forward, and basically that's what I did in all of the footage that was lost, except somehow it took like 25 minutes, and I just did it in like 4 minutes, and I'm not going to think too hard about what that says about me as a person or a YouTube creator or an editor. We're just going to move on with the build. And here we are, we got that cable installed, and we'll go ahead and mount the flight controller with the correct side facing up and the front facing arrow facing the front of the quad. Perfect. These pads right here are where the receiver installs. Exactly how you solder it up is going to depend on what kind of receiver you've got, but they can be used with any kind of receiver, FreeSky, Crossfire, etc. We're going to be using Crossfire, and it's going to wire up like so. Now, if you've wired up Crossfire to a Betaflight flight controller before, the way that KISS is doing it is going to, at least to me, it feels kind of weird, but we're just going to do it how we're told, and it'll presumably work. The way it's usually done is you've got ground and 5 volts, and then this pad is the TX pad of the receiver, which goes to the RX pad on the flight controller, and this pad is the RX pad of the receiver, which goes to the TX pad on the flight controller. But in this case, the TX pad is going to go to this pad labeled UPERT, which is also labeled TX2. So you've got TX to TX, which is kind of weird. And this RX pad here is going to go to RX TLM, which is, so we're just going to wire it up exactly how we're told to do it. And again, presumably it'll work. I do want to say, while we're here, these two pads, the RX TLM and the UPERT, they have little vias in them. I don't know why they have, there's these little holes, perforations almost in the pad. And it made it really hard to get solder to kind of stick. It was a pain in the butt to solder to. I don't know why they did that. But if you have the same trouble, you're not alone. Now, unlike an analog build where there would be a whole bunch more soldering to do to hook up the video transmitter and the camera, since we're going to be doing a Caddx Vista, it's actually way simpler. There's only one more thing we really need to solder up. Well, we're going to need to solder up power for the Vista, sure, but that's just going to be VBAT. It's going to be totally easy. The other thing we need to hook up is the OSD connection. The MSP protocol is used to communicate between the flight controller and the Vista, and it's used to draw the OSD and communicate VBAT and other information that you want to see in your goggles. And here's how we're going to do that. The MSP protocol is communicated via a UART on the flight controller, and so my first thought was to solder to the RX1 and TX1 pads right here. They look very convenient. And in fact, they're the only other TX and RX pads I could find broken out on this flight controller. Yes? Yeah. Not to say that the flight controller doesn't have a bunch of UARTs, just that they're not broken out to individual pads that are easy to solder to. But all the other tutorials I saw said that you need to put the Vista on UART 3. And so that is going to be in this plug, which is on the underside of the flight controller. And we're going to need to make a custom plug with these two pins in it. So that we can solder it to, not to a GPS as shown here, but to our Vista. And although this isn't a review of the flight controller per se, I gotta say this is something that has always frustrated me about KISS. Because they say that they're making it simple, and the way that they make it simple is to make it so there's only one way to do it. Which I guess it is simpler, but it always rubs me the wrong way, because I would rather just do it however I want. But that is based on the premise that I know what I want to do and what you should do. And maybe as a beginner, it's just better for someone to say, shut up and do it this way. And simpler. But like in here, I would like to solder these wires. Nah, I can't do that. You got to make a plug. I don't want a plug. I want to solder them. Sorry, out of luck. Just rubs me the wrong way. So we're going to take our flight controller and we're going to flip it over. This is the underside of the flight controller, not the top, which we were working with. We're going to flip it over. And the plug we're going to be working with is this one here with the two big round holes next to it. And the pins we want are the lowermost two pins right here. Can't have a solder pad. No. I don't want you to solder to that. Oh, Lord knows what would happen if we let you solder to that. By the way, what I'm working with here is this plug set. It comes with a whole bunch of these empty housings and then a whole bunch of pre-crimped wires with the connectors already on them, and it lets you make custom housings. I'll put a link to that down in the video description as well. I highly recommend you pick it up for situations just like this where you don't have the exact plug that you need and you have to make one yourself. Take two wires of the same length. I'm going to keep it right side up. And that's how it plugs in. I'm going to take two wires. We need long wires because we're going all the way back to the Vista. Okay, great. Two wires of the same length, and we're going to pop those suckers in there. And we're going to plug this back in here. And it looks like yellow is going to be RX and green is going to be TX. I didn't make my colors match the wiring diagram, but there you go. And we'll just flip this back over so it faces the right direction. Oh, and we'll plug in our ESC again. Perfect. The Caddx Vista is also going to need VBAT power. The Vista can be powered from VBAT up to 6S natively, so you don't need a voltage regulator or anything like that. One way to do that would be to solder on top of these XT60 pads here. Another way to do it though, I'm going to just reuse these convenient little VBAT pads here. They're right there on the ESC, so the power should be pretty clean. They're right next to the capacitor, so it should be pretty clean. And it's going to be easier to solder to a second, maybe. I mean, if you know you could solder on top of this joint easily, you can just go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and put it on a second joint though. Next, I'm going to solder up the Caddx Vista. Red wire to V, black wire to G, and then we're going to do TX and RX. RX is the one closest to the edge, so yellow is RX, which is going to go to TX on the flight controller, or on the Vista. And then green is going to go to RX on the Vista. And then we do not need to worry about the ground and S-bus wires because we're not using the Vista as our controller, we're using Crossfire. And the Vista is going to get installed in the back. So then for mounting the Vista, I'm going to use a set of M2 screws. If you need a M2 screw assortment, I've got a link in the video description. I like cap head M2 screws, and they are just going to go up through these 4 holes at the bottom and through the Vista. There are 4 holes in the Vista, and these screws are too freaking long. So there you go. I'll just have to find some shorter ones. And you can see there we've got it nice and screwed down into place. Let's make this neat. How about this? We'll put the camera wire underneath here and run it to the front of the quad. Just make sure it doesn't get pinched. You can order the Vista with an 8cm or a 12cm camera cable. I always get the 12cm cable, and if it's a little too long, then I just kind of give it some twists and take up the slack. But I've often had cases where if it was the 8cm, it wouldn't have reached. Like, I think it'd be pretty tight here if this was the 8cm wire, so I just always order the 12cm if I can. Nice. We are really getting somewhere. I'll put some M3 nuts on here. Since I think we're done soldering the flight controller, just hold it in place. And then I gotta figure out what I'm gonna do with the Vista antenna. And I had hoped to reuse the Apex Mr. Steele antenna bracket and have the antenna sort of, I see that that's not going to work though, because it's just going to be, it'd be in the way of the Vista. So I've got here the original factory Vista antenna, but you can see that I'm going to have a hard time figuring out how to mount that. So I'm probably going to need to go research that and see if there's some kind of 3D printed adapter or something that someone has solved this problem for me. Because you can see that it's going to be tricky to mount. This frame is sized for Mr. Steele's camera, which is a mini camera, isn't it? It's not, we got too much space here. We're like 1 millimeter off. So I got to figure out if I need to put some washers in there or something to space it out. Crap. Well, we'll have to solve that problem as well. Welcome back to Joshua from the future, who has solved all of those problems and is ready to present the solutions to you. But first, I need to correct Joshua from the past, who did something dumb, as he is prone to do. I went around asking, how do you guys hook a Caddx Vista to the FETTEC F7? Like, where's the best place to get VBAT from? And they said, VBAT is in the freaking plug, you freaking idiot. So what I should have done, instead of soldering to the ESC, is used TX3 and RX3 just like I did, and then use BAT plus and ground. Don't use 5 volt or 3.3 volt. Yeah, and then just power the Vista off that plug. Just buy one of those SH cable sets that I showed you and build yourself a plug with just those wires in it and solder them up to the Vista, and then it'll just plug in here, where I've got just the UARTs. Now, I'm not going to go back and redo that because I've already made my mistake, and so it'll probably be fine going forward, but that's what I should have done. The other problem that I'm here to show you how I solved is the problem with the camera size. And frankly, if you go on Thingiverse, there are shims you can print, but a lot of people don't have a 3D printer, or maybe that's just not the solution you prefer. What I'm going to do is I have some M2 washers. These are just M2 washers you can just buy. I couldn't find an assortment of M2 washers only, so I just have this huge assortment of metric washers, most of which I will never use. I only needed the M2 washers. And I'm just going to use those M2 washers to kind of shim this out. I don't know how well you can see. There's a couple washers in there, and I'm thinking about adding just a washer. I'm going to shim that out, and it'll be fine. As for the capacitor, I've tried a whole bunch of different ways, and I think the best thing to do is, first, I'm going to go ahead and put some heat shrink or tape around it, because this is VBAT, and if it makes contact with anything, it'll be bad. So that's, okay, that's taken care of now. And then, as near as I can tell, the best way to do it is to put it up against this standoff vertically. There's plenty of room for that, and there's just no way I can find to put it straight up or lay flat that will actually work. But for this particular capacitor anyway, that's going to be fine. Well, I went to Thingiverse and I found some 3D prints that help solve some of the problems that I'm having. I'll put a link to the 3D prints I'm using, as well as Impulse RC actually has official 3D prints for some of these things. I'll put a link to that also in the video description. But I found this mount for the Caddx Vista antenna, and it's got a little split in it that you just place it around the antenna, and then you use a zip tie to hold it in place, and it just, yeah, that's going to be fine. Just drops down on top here. And for the Crossfire antenna, we've got this little print here. It goes on under here. I'm probably also going to use some M3 washers. I always like to use M3 washers when I use screws through TPU, because the TPU can really rip out. So it comes in my assorted washers kit that I talked about earlier. And I'm going to switch this antenna over to an Immortal T. That's pretty straightforward. The other thing that I'll show you is I did download some of these little 3D printed shims for the camera. You'll notice the camera's been removed. The washers, I mean, I just wanted to show you the shims in case, like, you don't have the washers, but you do have a 3D printer. You can print these shims and they'll make the camera fit. Okay, so let me put this back together, and then I think it'll be time to go configure it in the KISS configurator. Before I button it up, I just want to give you guys a shot of the final product. since I've been kind of all over the place describing the build. This is what happens when I've never done a build before and I'm just kind of feeling my way through it. Welcome to the process. I got the camera mounted. I've got the TVS diode mounted. That's going to be tight, but I think it's going to be okay. Oh yeah, no, it's slipped up. It's going to be okay. We've got the Vista. The Crossfire is mounted on top of the Vista with some double-sided, some VHB tape. I'm not sure it's going to stick. I may need to find a more robust way of doing that. Oh, I'm going to have to change these standoffs out. The Apex comes with this bracket for mounting the antenna, but it goes right here, but we're not doing that. And then if you don't use that bracket, you use some longer standoffs, but those come with the frame kit. We got the Vista antenna mounted, and we've got the Crossfire antenna mounted, just like so. I think we're ready to go. Well, now it's time to sit down and configure the quadcopter on the bench. And I gotta say, I gotta remind you, I am not a super expert on KISS, but come along with me for the ride. We'll see how we do. And I want to thank Mark Spatz, UAV Tech, here on YouTube. He just, a week or so ago, put out this amazing video going through the latest version of the KISS configurator, a complete rundown of all the settings from the perspective of someone coming from Betaflight. And this was a great resource for me as I was just trying to make sure I didn't miss anything. So I'll put a link to that down in the video description if you want to check it out. But let's dive in. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in the flight controller to USB on my computer. When I do that, I should see a new COM port appear here in the upper left. Quick note, if you're coming from Betaflight, KISS uses the CP210 driver, not the STM32 driver. I think that's true for the KISS flight controller. I'm not sure if it's true for the FETTEC flight controller. Regardless, if you don't see a COM port here appear here, you may not have the CP210 driver installed and you may need to install it. So let's continue. We'll connect. KISS flight controller is not activated. Activate now. Okay. Yeah, I guess it's activated. Fantastic. And let's dive into the configuration. I totally know how to do this. I guess should we update the firmware to the latest? Select remote firmware. FETTEC KISS FC. Firmware version. Yeah, let's take the latest version. 4.0, 4.5, 4.6. I see. So we'll go with 4.6. Now that I've updated the firmware, let's check our settings here. The UAV is a Caddx. I'm going to assume the motor output mapping is default because it's Mr. Steele's setup, so I assume it's the same between the previous KISS and this one, but we'll double check that. The receiver type is going to be Crossfire. We've got this setting here, failsafe level mode seconds. I'm going to set that to 0. That causes the quadcopter to go into auto level mode if you failsafe. I don't really like that. If I failsafe, I'd like it to just fall out of the air, please. As for PID presets, we're going to leave that alone for now. We'll come back and mess with that. And we will save that. Let's check the receiver to see if the receiver is working. We can check that in data output. Throttle, yaw, roll, pitch is correct. One thing to keep in mind is I don't think there's a way in KISS to rearrange the channel map. So if your channels are not in the correct order, you will need to go into the mixer screen on your radio and rearrange the channels. Don't go into the input screen, by the way. That's not going to have the effect that you intend. You're going to go into the mixer screen and rearrange the 4 control channels so they're in the correct order. You'll also need to set up Mr. Steele's idle up function. The way that Mr. Steele sets up his quad is that you arm and the motors start to spin, but the PID loop is not active and the quadcopter does not begin to fly until you flip the idle up switch, and then the quadcopter is ready to fly. And that lets him arm and test his motors without the quadcopter flipping out on him. So the normal procedure with KISS would be arm, idle up, fly, disarm, and then turn idle up off. Or you don't even have to do this. You don't have to do idle up, but that's how he does it, and that's how a lot of people want to do it. So that's what I'm showing you. I am working on the Radiomaster TX16S, but these instructions are going to be the same for pretty much any OpenTX radio, going all the way back to the QX7 and the X9D. OpenTX is OpenTX no matter what radio you're working with. The screens might look a little different, but the basic structure of the menus and options is still there. The first thing you want to do is decide which two switches you're going to use. One of them is going to be your arming switch. One's going to be your idle up switch. I'm going to have my arming switch as switch SF and my idle up switch as switch SE. You don't have to do it that way. Some Mr. Steele does it though. So, you know, you just do whatever you want. But okay, I'm going to press model setup and I'm going to go to the mixer screen. And the first thing you're going to see is that I have my 4 main control inputs, just like usual, and I've got my arming switch set up as a typical mix to put that arming switch on channel 5, and then I've got this other switch, switch SD, that's on channel 6, and that has nothing to do with this. That's just my angle mode and turtle mode switch. This is completely unrelated. So I got my arming switch here on channel 5. Fine. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to go to the special functions, and you're going to set up a special function. And that special function is going to be set to your idle up switch, and it's going to say that when that idle up switch is in a certain position, it's going to override your throttle channel, which for KISS is channel 1. I think it's always channel 1. You're going to override the throttle channel to the value of -100, and that is and you also need to have this box ticked on for that to work. And so what that's going to do, if we go all the way back to the main screen, if I raise the throttle, here I'm moving the throttle, and you can see that nothing is happening to the throttle channel because my idle up switch it's locked out. But if I move the idle up switch into a different position, now the throttle is working. Okay? There's one more thing that you need to do, and that is we're going to go to the model setup, we're going to page to the outputs. And what we need to do is we need to adjust the bottom of the throttle channel upwards so that when we idle up an arm, the throttle does not go all the way to 0. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that that is greater than the min command parameter in the KISS configurator. When the idle up switch is in the lockout position, the throttle is all the way down. As soon as I flip that switch, the throttle has moved up to -84%. As far as PIDs go, KISS has a really cool thing where they have a whole bunch of presets. And what you want to do is you want to select user presets, and that opens up a ton of these little presets here. I guess I could do Mr. Steele's presets, of course. There's also a preset from Crunked. Crunked is a prominent tuner who tunes both KISS and Betaflight, and he has what's called his KISS Golden presets. If you're working with basically any 5-inch KISS quad, start with the Crunked Golden presets. But I think I'm going to try to find Mr. Steele's presets here. Oh, there's so many. A search function would be nice. Mr. Steele. Real Mr. Steele PID values 220917. Well, let's see. That seems pretty out of date. I don't trust that. That's pretty old. All right, we'll go with the Crunked Golden starting point, and I'll just hit use, and it will load them, and we will save. We're going to need to set up our aux functions. In order to do that, there's no way to actually see. I wish you could see the actual readouts on this page. So we got to go to data output. All right, so arming is going to be aux1 high, aux1 high. All of these turtle mode I definitely want. And level mode is going to be aux2 medium. There you go. And I'm going to arm. No movement on the throttle because we haven't activated idle up yet. I'm going to activate idle up. No, it's still active. Is that how it should be? We'll go back down here. Yeah, now it's dead. Idle up. The motors, the PWM outputs are active. Lower throttle, still active. You can see them sort of winding up. Idle up, switch down. Yeah, okay. And now we're dead again. Let's check these motors. We got a motor test function right here. Let's just disarm. Let's test. Props are off. I do know what I'm doing. Let me plug in a battery. Let's see. How do we test them? Let's just check that. There we go. Okay, we'll check our directions. That is going the wrong way. That is props out. So I don't know if this is going to be true for you, but for me at least, when I spin PWM1, which is supposed to be the front left motor, for me, PWM2, the front right motor spins. So I at least am going to need to change my board orientation, or my motor orientation. Let's just check this out. PWM1 is in this position. So it looks like the board is correct front to back, but it's upside down, side to side. So how do we fix that? We'll go into oh no. Oh no, I've done it. Wait, stop. Okay. Good thing I had props off. So here we've got motor output mapping. Oh, see, I got the diagram here, so I know the positions. Let's just, I think it should be upside down. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, that seems correct. At this point, I need to reverse the direction of some of these motors. And of course, I could do that by resoldering the motor wires to swap any 2 of the 3 motor wires. Then the motor will spin the other direction. But of course, that's a pain in the butt, and you don't want to have to do that. So the first place I went was the ESC flasher page here in the KISS configurator, but it only works with KISS ESCs, not with FETTEC ESCs. So for the FETTEC flight controller, you use the KISS configurator. But for the FETTEC ESC, you use a different app. This is the FETTEC ESC configurator. We'll go ahead and download this installer, and we'll see how that goes. What if we go to settings? Okay, perfect. Reverse motor direction on 1 and 3. We'll hit save and save. Connect data output. Test motors. I know what I'm doing. Enable motors test. 1, 2, 3, 4. And okay. They're spinning the right direction and they're mapped correctly. This freaking soft start on the ESC is hot. Look how the motors start. You see how they do that sinusoidal soft start? It's freaking hot. Not only does it look cool, but it also makes it easier to tell which direction the motor is spinning. Normally the motor just goes, wah, and it's a little hard to tell which way it's spinning. You know, very nice. There's just a couple more things we need to do before we are ready to fly. And the first one is to change the ESC protocol to FETTEC one-wire. If you are using the FETTEC flight controller and ESC, you want to be using this. FETTEC has told me that they are still working out a few little kinks in their D-Shot implementation. I have no idea what those kinks are or what they mean for you, but basically if you can be using FETTEC one-wire, you should. That lets the ESC talk to the flight controller over a single wire. It's already in that wiring harness that you used, so just select FETTEC one-wire if you have the FETTEC ESC and flight controller. The other thing you're going to want to do is, if you're using DJI, we're going to go to the Advanced tab, and we're going to choose Use Advanced Serial Configuration. We're going to get a great big warning here, and we're going to click I know what I am doing. And then we are going to change Serial 3 to DJI MSP. And that will let our DJI OSD work and other DJI related functions in the goggles. And we'll hit save. Here we go. Ooh, that slow start, so cool. And now idle up. We're ready to go. Gonna take me a minute to adjust to the rates. These are default KISS rates. They're lower than my normal rates in the center. I can feel that already. How's she fly, boys? Let me just get used to these rates. Oh yeah, that's slow as heck. Very different. Got that KISS prop wash, beautiful prop wash handling as always. Of course, Crunked probably deserves some credit for that. Prop wash? What prop wash? It doesn't. There's a little prop wash there, yikes. Interesting. No prop wash there. I'm gonna find out how much of this is Mr. Steele's tune. Interesting, very interesting. I remember when I first flew Mr. Steele's quad, just thinking, I started flying a little bit like him. Now, I don't want to like insult anybody by suggesting that I'm as good a pilot as Mr. Steele, but I just had a little bit of that zoopy, twitchy. I just felt like I could go anywhere and respond to anything. I wasn't afraid to go into somewhere. See, right there, like, for example, I was just felt just a little out of touch. Like, am I at the right throttle position? What's the quad doing? And on his original build, I was just like, where am I going? Where am I going? Where am I going? Where am I going? And I'm not having that feeling. And I wonder if that's somewhat an effect of latency. An effect of latency that you don't notice the latency feeling like delay, but you just kind of lack confidence to dive into places where latency, where you would need that response time. And I talked about this when I reviewed his quad compared to the iFlight Cidora. That confidence might be a symptom of low latency. And now here we've got KISS instead of Betaflight, but we've changed the latency obviously because we're using DJI. Oh, get there. And like, I think there's something to it. His claim that with low latency, you do gain confidence. See, I have no trouble doing moves like this, even like a little gap like that, because I just know this area so well that I know it's coming. I know the lines. But as soon as I end up in a situation where I maybe need more twitch response, I start to lose confidence. Like, let's go down here. I don't fly down here very often. This is my wife's area. She's this area for the kids to play in. And I just don't know this area quite as well. And, oh, see, like right there. Oh, hello, tree. Get out of there, son. Get out of there. Oh, Philly. I'm really glad I did this experiment. When I flew the Mr. Steele KISS Apex, I definitely thought there was something special to how it flew. And the question I wanted to answer was, is that the sort of totality of what Mr. Steele has put together? Everything from his PIDs, his motors, the weight of the build, the camera, or is there like one particular aspect of that is carrying the weight? Like, is it just the KISS flight controller is just that different? And I gotta say, like, it flies really good. But if you were to hand me this quad and say, fly it, if we were to put my rates on it, I'm not sure I would, like, obviously know that it wasn't a Betaflight quad. I'm sure that KISS people out here right now are freaking out. They've only got like 2 packs on it right now, so maybe I would start to notice more differences as I flew more. But there was not that sort of earth-shattering, whoa, hey, something special here moment that I had when I flew the actual Steele build. So I don't know what you want to take from that. Whenever people ask me which flight controller is the best, KISS, Betaflight, EmuFlight, which is the best, I say they're all good in their own ways. And you can find people who say, Betaflight, I flew like crap for me, and then I put KISS on my quad, and it was amazing. And you can find people who say, I had trouble with KISS, and I put Betaflight on it, and it flew amazing. I think the takeaway is that they can all fly good, and sometimes one of them will fly better under certain circumstances. But I don't think I would agree if you said that there was one that was sort of universally magical and amazing in every circumstance. There's more work to do here. Get a better tune on this. Take DJI off of it and put Steele's camera back on. No, I'm not going to do that. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. You're going to be seeing more freestyle from this thing. I'm going to be flying it more and hopefully getting more of a sense of what this FETTEC flight controller and this KISS PID controller are capable of, and maybe even trying to get the tune a little more sharpened up. Maybe I'll work with Crunch and see if I can get it tuned a little sharper. But for now, that's going to finish the video. Links down in the video description to the parts that I'm using. If you want to pick them up, definitely use those links. They're affiliate links. And that means that when you click that link and make any purchase, I get a small commission. It's an easy way for you to support the channel. It doesn't cost you anything. Other useful links down in the video description as well. Let me know what you think. What did you think of how it flew? Am I just crazy? Does KISS just have that magic and I'm just missing it because I'm a freaking heathen? Tell me in the comments. Happy flying. You guys, I don't know where I am, and I don't know what's going to happen, but if I don't make it out of this, I just want to know that you subscribe to my channel, or maybe join my Patreon, or click one of these videos I picked out for you.